My name is Daniel Brooks, and before anything went wrong, before insurance calls and forms and words like liability entered my life, I was the kind of man people called dependable. Not as a compliment, as a fact. The kind of fact you don't question until it disappears. I grew up in a house where noise meant trouble. My father worked nights at the mill, and when he slept during the day, my mother moved through the house like she was apologizing to the walls. You learned early to listen before you spoke, to notice moods, to solve problems quietly. I was good at that. I was the oldest. I learned how to read a room before I learned how to drive. Paul was different. For years younger. Louder. Always talking. Always explaining. If something broke, he'd already have a reason. If he was late, it was never his fault. My parents called him spirited. They called me steady. At the time, I thought that meant they trusted me more. It took decades to realize it meant they expected more from me. There's a moment in every family when roles lock in. You don't notice it when it happens. You only see it later, looking back, when everything makes sense in a way that hurts. For us, it was the summer Paul wrecked our uncle's car. He was 17. No one got hurt. The car was totaled. My parents sat at the kitchen table arguing in low voices. Paul stood in the hallway staring at the floor. I was 21, home from trade school, still smelling like grease and metal. My father looked at me and said, "Can you talk to him?" Just like that. Not can you help, not can you be there. Talk to him. As if words from me would land differently. As if consequences were negotiable if delivered by the right person. I talked to him. He cried. He promised. I believed him. And just like that, I became the buffer. That role followed me everywhere. When Paul bounced from job to job, I rewrote his resume. When he forgot to file taxes, I helped him sort it out. When his marriage started cracking, I let him sleep on my couch for a few nights that turned into months. I told myself this was what brothers did. I told myself family meant patience. What I didn't tell myself, what I couldn't admit, was that every time I stepped in, Paul stepped back. He learned that the floor would always appear under his feet, even if he didn't look where he was going. My own life moved slowly and predictably. I liked it that way. I worked at the water treatment facility, climbed into compliance, learned every regulation until it felt like a second language. I married once, divorced quietly, raised my kids with rules that made sense. Show up, don't lie, fix what you break. I paid my mortgage early. I kept my credit clean. At my age, your name is not just a name. It's a record. It's proof you didn't leave messes behind you. Paul didn't see it that way. To him, systems were obstacles. Paperwork was optional. Consequences were things that happened to other people. He talked about starting businesses the way gamblers talk about systems. Always one step away from winning big. Always sure the next move would fix everything. After our parents died, Paul stayed in their house. I handled the paperwork. Again, closed accounts, paid final bills, filed forms. I didn't mind at first. I told myself grief makes people messy. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself a lot of things that sounded reasonable if you didn't say them out loud. Paul decided to start a contracting business. He needed help setting it up. Just advice, he said. Then just a little guidance. Then just someone to look over forms. Then just a signature here to vouch that he was legitimate. It's not money, he said. It's just credibility. That word should have stopped me. Instead, I nodded. Credibility was something I had plenty of. It never occurred to me that lending it out meant losing control of it. At first, nothing went wrong. That's the most dangerous phase. When everything seems fine, you don't tighten boundaries. You loosen them. You tell yourself you were right to trust. You tell yourself this time really is different. There were signs, though. I see them now. Paul showing up unannounced at my place, asking questions about my job that didn't quite make sense. Who signs off on projects? Who checks safety reports? How long do records stay on file? He asked casually, like conversation. I answered casually, because I had nothing to hide. I didn't notice how carefully he listened. Sometimes he'd joke, "Good thing you're around, Danny. You keep me out of jail." He laughed when he said it. I laughed too. People always laugh before they understand the weight of what they're saying. There were nights I lay awake thinking about whether I was helping or enabling. I'd decide I was overthinking it. Paul was my brother. Family wasn't a contract. You didn't itemize loyalty. You just showed up. That belief felt noble. It felt right. It felt like something my father would have approved of. What it really was habit wearing a moral costume. The last normal moment I remember was a Sunday afternoon in early spring. Paul came over with coffee, and sat at my kitchen table. He talked about a job that had gone sideways, a client who refused to pay, a worker who'd gotten hurt, but it wasn't serious. He said it fast, like speed would keep it from settling. I listened, nodding, already forming solutions in my head. At one point, he said, "If things ever really blow up, I know you've got my back." He didn't ask. He stated it. I felt something tighten in my chest. A warning. I ignored it. Because that's what men like me do. We ignore warnings until they become alarms. When my phone buzzed during that fire drill months later, it wasn't the first time Paul had put my name somewhere without asking. It was just the first time the system noticed. And systems don't care about intention. They care about records. The first call came 2 days after the fire drill. It was early enough that the sky hadn't decided what color it wanted to be yet. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee half poured, listening to the hum of the refrigerator like it was the only thing keeping the house alive. The phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer at first. I never do. Unknown numbers are how problems introduce themselves. But then it rang again. And again. Same number. I picked up. "Mr. Brooks?" "Yes." "This is Alan with Midwest Mutual Insurance. We're following up on a workers' compensation claim that lists you as supervising authority. We just need to verify a few details." Just need to verify. That phrase again. It always sounds harmless. Like checking a spelling. Like making sure the lights are off. I told him the truth. Slowly. Carefully. I explained that I didn't supervise my brother, that I wasn't involved in his business, that I'd never been to that job site. Alan listened without interrupting. He asked for dates. For titles. For confirmation of employment. When I finished, there was a pause long enough for me to hear my own breathing. "Thank you," he said finally. "That helps." Helps who, I wondered. After the call, I didn't go to work right away. I sat at the table and stared at my coffee until it went cold. There's a particular kind of fear that doesn't feel loud. It feels administrative. Like your life is being quietly placed into folders by people you'll never meet. By noon, HR called me in again. Not urgently. Calm voices. Closed door. The HR manager slid a notepad toward herself and said, "Dan, we're not accusing you of anything. But because your name is attached, we need to document." Document. Another word with weight. I nodded. Answered questions. Gave dates. Left feeling like I'd just testified without realizing it. That afternoon, Paul finally called. He sounded irritated, like I'd inconvenienced him. "Why are you talking to insurance?" he asked. I said, "Why are you using my name?" He sighed. "Because they don't trust small contractors. They want someone real." Someone real. That landed harder than he intended. "And you didn't think to ask?" I said. "I knew you'd say yes," he replied. That was the moment I understood something important. In Paul's mind, my consent wasn't something to request. It was something to assume. The next few days blurred together. Calls from insurance. Emails requesting clarification. A letter asking me to confirm that I was not financially responsible for medical expenses related to the claim. I read every word twice. Sometimes 3 times. I printed everything and put it in a folder. Old habits. Evidence belongs on paper. At night, sleep became shallow. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and think about my job. About how close compliance and liability sit next to each other. About how quickly a clean record can get muddy just by proximity. I kept replaying old moments with Paul, looking for the exact point where helping became enabling. The truth was uncomfortable. There wasn't one point. There were dozens. Small, reasonable decisions that added up to one big mistake. A week later, the credit report changed again. Another inquiry. This time from a medical billing service. I felt my chest tighten. I called the number on the report and waited on hold listening to music that sounded like it was designed to erase urgency. When a woman finally answered, she asked me to verify my identity. I did. She told me there were outstanding charges associated with a workplace injury under my guarantor information. "I'm not a guarantor," I said. She apologized. Said she'd note it. Asked me to send documentation. That was when the phrase finally appeared out loud. Identity misuse. The insurance adjuster called me back the next day. Same calm voice. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "we need to ask you directly. Did you authorize your brother to use your personal information for this claim?" I said no. "Then," she continued, "we're required to open a formal investigation." I asked what that meant. She didn't sugarcoat it. "It means we stop assuming mistakes and start looking for intent." Intent. That word sat between us like a blade. I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. I thought about calling Paul. I thought about warning him. I thought about smoothing it over one last time. The reflex was strong, decades old. But another thought crept in, quieter and steadier. If I do that, I'm choosing this again. So I didn't call him. The investigation moved forward the way investigations do. Slowly, methodically. Investigators asked for handwriting samples, for employment records, for emails. I gave them everything. Not dramatically, not angrily, just thoroughly. At work, my supervisor pulled me aside and said, "We're on your side, Dan. But keep us informed." That was the closest thing to comfort anyone could offer. Paul's messages changed tone. First irritation, then defensiveness, then panic. "They're asking about fraud," he texted. "Just tell them it was okay." That sentence made my hands shake. Not because I was scared, because I realized how differently we saw the world. To him, truth was flexible if it solved the problem. To me, truth was the only thing standing between me and losing everything I'd built. One night, he showed up at my door unannounced. I didn't invite him in. We stood on the porch under the yellow light, cold air between us. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "You always do this. You make things official when they don't need to be." I looked at him and saw a man who had never learned the difference between kindness and protection. "This didn't need to be official," I said quietly, "until you made it official by putting my name on paper." He laughed, sharp and hollow. "You're really going to let them ruin me?" That word again. Let. As if consequences were something I controlled. As if the system were a dog I could call off. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I stopped doing something. There's a difference." He left without saying goodbye. The hearing date arrived in an envelope that looked like every other piece of mail. Plain, white, heavy. It wasn't a courtroom hearing, just a formal review. But seeing my name typed next to words like misrepresentation and liability made my stomach drop anyway. I sat at my kitchen table and read it twice. Then I put it in the folder. In the days leading up to it, the waiting became the worst part. No calls, no updates, just time to think. I replayed my life like evidence. Every loan I'd co-signed, every favor I'd granted, every time I told myself it was easier to say yes than to explain no. I wondered how many men like me were walking around one signature away from disaster. The morning of the review, I put on a clean shirt and drove to the office early. The parking lot was quiet. I sat in my car for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. Not to calm down, to focus. Fear makes people sloppy. Sloppy people lose control of their story. Inside, the room was small. Beige walls, a table, a recorder. Paul sat across from me, leg bouncing, jaw tight. He didn't look at me. When the investigator asked him why he listed me as supervisor, he said, "Because he always helps." When asked if he had my permission, he hesitated. That hesitation said more than any answer. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't give a speech. I said exactly what happened. Dates, facts, no emotion. The investigator nodded, taking notes. At the end, she said, "Thank you for your cooperation." That was it. No verdict. No resolution. Just more waiting. Afterward, Paul stormed out. I stayed. Signed one more form. Initialed another. When I walked outside, the air felt different. Not lighter. Clearer. Like the moment after a storm when the noise is gone but the damage hasn't been tallied yet. That night, my phone was silent. No calls. No texts. For the first time in weeks, there was nothing to respond to. I sat in my living room with the lights off and realized something unsettling. Without the constant emergencies, I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd built an identity around being the answer. Now there were no questions. And somewhere deep down, beneath the anxiety and the guilt and the fear of what might still come, there was something else. Relief. Because for the first time, the system knew my name. And it knew it wasn't supposed to be there. The calls didn't stop all at once. They thinned out. Like rain turning into mist. Like a storm that realizes it's already done enough damage and doesn't need to announce itself anymore. The first thing that stopped was Paul's confidence. You could hear it disappear in his voicemails. At first, he still sounded like himself, annoyed, defensive, explaining how everything was being blown out of proportion. Then the pauses got longer. His voice dropped. He started saying my name more often, like it might soften something. Like familiarity could still be currency. "Dan," he said in one message, slower now. "They're talking about intent. I don't think they're supposed to do that." Intent. The word had finally reached him. I didn't call back, not because I was angry, but because I had already said everything that mattered, and repeating yourself doesn't make truth stronger. It just makes you tired. At work, things returned to their usual rhythm. Pumps, readings, reports. I found comfort in the predictability, in the way systems work when you don't interfere with them. My supervisor stopped asking for updates. HR closed my file with a brief email thanking me for my cooperation. No apology, no reassurance, just confirmation that my name had been separated cleanly from the incident. That mattered more than I expected. When you've lived your whole life quietly doing the right thing, the fear isn't public shame. It's contamination. It's the idea that someone else's mess might stick to you no matter how careful you've been. Seeing it removed, officially, in writing, felt like breathing out after holding air too long. Paul's business didn't survive the review. That part traveled faster than I thought it would. Small towns always do. One canceled contract. One denied claim. One supplier who suddenly wanted payment up front. He blamed everyone. The insurance company. The city. Me. Anyone but himself. I heard it secondhand. I didn't ask. The hearing outcome arrived in the mail on a Thursday afternoon. Plain envelope. No drama. The claim was officially ruled fraudulent. No benefits paid. The case referred for further action depending on compliance and restitution. The language was careful, neutral. It didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like accounting. I read it twice, then filed it away. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept all the way through. A few days later, Paul showed up again. This time he didn't knock hard, just stood on the porch and waited. I opened the door and saw a man I didn't fully recognize. Thinner, eyes tired, the swagger gone, replaced by something like calculation. Or fear. They're saying I have to pay everything back, he said. Not hello, not sorry. I nodded. They're saying if I mess up again, it won't stay civil. I nodded again. He shifted his weight. You could still help. Just tell them you knew. Just say it was okay. There it was. The last offer. The final attempt to pull me back into the role. I looked at him and felt something close to sadness, but not guilt. Not anymore. I already helped, I said. I helped by telling the truth. His jaw tightened. You really let it go this far. I shook my head slowly. No. I stopped stopping it. That distinction mattered. Paul stood there a moment longer, waiting for something else. Anger, maybe, or forgiveness. When it didn't come, he turned and walked away without another word. His car started. The sound faded. And just like that, the emergency ended. The silence afterward was strange. Unfamiliar. I kept reaching for my phone out of habit, expecting another call, another problem to solve. But there were none. No crises. No forms. No voices asking me to fix what they'd broken. I didn't realize how much of my identity had been built around being needed until I wasn't. Thanksgiving came and went quietly. My daughter asked once more about her uncle. I told her the truth again, a little differently this time. Sometimes people only learn when you stop standing between them and the ground. She thought about that, then nodded. Kids understand boundaries faster than adults. On a cold evening in December, almost a year after the fire drill, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my keys laid out in front of me. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I needed the reminder. They were my keys. My house. My name. Nothing borrowed. Nothing shared. I thought about all the years I'd mistaken peace for silence. About how many times I'd stepped in to avoid conflict and called it love. What I finally understood was simple and uncomfortable. Protecting someone from consequences doesn't protect them. It just delays the damage and spreads it wider. Paul didn't call again. Not that year. Maybe not ever. I don't know how his story ends. And for the first time, that isn't my responsibility. What I do know is this. The moment I stopped being the emergency contact, I stopped being the liability. My name went back to being mine. My life went quiet in the best possible way. And if there's any lesson in all of this, it's not about revenge. It's about boundaries. About understanding that fairness doesn't require cruelty. It only requires honesty and the strength to let the system do what it was designed to do. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say isn't, "I'll fix it." It's, "I won't." And then you let the silence finish the work.